So it's almost as if Sony is trying to make the PlayStation 4 Pro as unattractive as it could possibly be. Like, I don't really feel like they're trying to really sell this thing, because for months you've heard me say on this channel that if there's one thing that would make me consider upgrading, this goes for the Scorpio as well, it has to be higher frames per second in games. Both Sony and Microsoft dropped the ball this generation. I couldn't care less about resolution, but I do care about smooth gameplay. And that's why for the last several months, I've been playing almost exclusively on the PC. But now here comes our first quote-unquote upgraded console with more raw power, with glorious emulated 4K resolution, and it's still running games at 30 frames per second. And I'm going to break down why I think this is so dumb and how Sony is shooting themselves in the foot. So Sony has stated that they want parity between the original PlayStation and the Pro when it comes to frames per second because, quote, Sony doesn't want to give an advantage to Pro players. And I mean, that sounds really sweet and all, you know? It sounds like they really care about the original PlayStation owners. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to sell you this upgraded console that's being held back because of our older console. I mean, that makes a whole hell of a lot of sense, right? So the other day I said that 30 frames per second to 60 frames per second isn't a huge advantage. Now, some morons took that as meaning I said there was no advantage. But for the vast majority of people watching who aren't complete retards, you understand the distinction. There's a distinction between saying there's no advantage and there's a huge advantage. And again, I go back to the last argument in that last video where you don't hear people whining and crying, bitching and breaking down on the internet, writing up petitions just because for over a decade people have been playing at different frames per second in PC games. I mean, have you seen this? Have you seen people melting down saying, oh gosh, if I just had 60 frames per second, I'd be so much better and I could finally kill people. You have people playing games and enjoying games. Some of them are running at sub 30 frames per second, while in the same game, somebody else is running at over 120. And I guarantee you the 30 frames per second guys can hold their own, because if they couldn't, then they wouldn't be playing the freaking game in the first place. You can't take somebody who blows donkey balls at 30 frames per second and then let them play on a 60 frames per second rig, and then all of a sudden they're going to turn into an MLG god. That's not how it works. But let's go ahead and just destroy this whole fairy tale that you're already playing on this level playing field when it comes to consoles. What you have to realize is that there's certain people out there who have always had a certain advantage. For instance, one thing that I doubt a lot of console players actually even pay attention to when they're going out, they're shopping for a new TV, is a lot of TVs have huge input lag on them. And in fact, I would say that a lot of the TVs' input lag is probably worse than what it would be having somebody play at 30 and somebody else play at 60. That's why a lot of TVs have built-in game modes, which most people don't even pay attention to. But the game mode is there to try to reduce that latency. And what happens is whenever you turn on this game mode, it actually lowers the quality of the picture that you see on your screen. That's how they make up for the processing power. They have to take something else and degrade it. And if you want to read more about it, I'll leave a link down below. But yes, TV lag is a thing. You have a TV that's got lower latency, then you're going to have an advantage already on consoles. Second point is, Sony themselves proclaimed how great 4K resolution gaming is. You can see the tiniest of details if you've ever watched anybody game on a 4K screen. Now, they mentioned this even during their briefing whenever they were showing off the Pro. They were talking about how you could be staring at a person in the distance, and if you were looking at just a regular HD screen, they would look like a blur, but on 4K, they're gonna be crystal clear. So they're okay apparently with people having an advantage, you know, playing shooters, sniping people in 4K while others are looking at a blur. I don't understand why they'll let you have an advantage when it comes to that, but, you know, we gotta have parity when it comes to frames per second. What about HDR? They've bragged about how much greater the color and contrast is for gaming. Have you ever played a game where if you're like me, I've played several games where I'll walk into a really dark room or something, and you basically have to jack up the brightness like in the game or on the TV or whatever in order to see things because the room's so damn dark. Well, it's because your TV probably doesn't do contrast and color that well. So are you saying that those people who have HDR, who are going to have much better color, much better contrast, they're not going to have some sort of advantage in game? You're not going to be able to see people maybe a little bit better? Is there not an advantage in multiplayer games whenever you're closer in proximity to the servers and you're getting lower latency, you're getting lower ping times? Is it not an advantage when somebody has state-of-the-art headphones or a big old surround sound system where they can hear every little footstep walking up behind them, be able to magically turn around and shoot you in the face, and you're sitting there wondering, how did they know that I was behind them? Is that not an advantage? My favorite, though, is this. They don't want some people having an advantage. But have they banned scuff controllers? Have they banned premium inputs? Sony, if you really don't want people having any sort of an advantage, then why the hell are you selling on your very own official PlayStation website an officially licensed mouse and keyboard that works on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 3? And it's marketed by claiming this gives you the precision of PC gaming on consoles. Is playing on mouse and keyboard not a bigger disadvantage than playing against somebody with controllers? I mean, seriously, how can you not laugh at this? Mark Cerny was talking about the PlayStation 4 Pro DualShock controller, the brand new controller that comes out with the system, and one of his selling points was that this controller has minimal latency, and it'll be great for certain fighting games like Street Fighter is one of the things that he was talking about. So it offers lower latency, which is that not an advantage over the original PlayStation controller? And going back to, Microsoft putting out the Elite controller, did that destroy everything? Did somebody else, find out that everything just went to complete shit and everybody had a huge advantage whenever they had an Elite controller and everybody else didn't? I mean, where do you draw the line? Why is the line only at frames per second? When certain games aren't going to be able to hold steady frames per second on the original PlayStation like they already can't do, are you going to go in and demand that the Pro version be gimped so that it has the same sort of hiccups, so that it has the same flaws as far as its capability? Of course not. But is that not an advantage when one system is already going to run more frames per second, when it's already going to hold a steadier frames per second? Now, I suppose they could be just using this as an excuse, and really the Pro isn't built so that it is capable of really producing a lot more frames per second in the first place. I mean, one of the biggest complaints whenever the specs were first leaked was that the GPU got a nice boost. The CPU got overclocked, but everybody was still looking at the CPU saying, you know what? It's still going to be a bottleneck, and they really were hoping that Sony was going to do something more with the CPU, but it turns out they haven't, and already some of those flaws could be ready to show. If you follow me on Twitter, the other day I posted up a Digital Foundry video where they were showing Horizon Zero Dawn running on the PlayStation 4 Pro, and it was struggling to hold 30 frames per second. So it's possible the hardware is still just too weak to handle that 60 frames per second, and maybe they're just using this whole, we just want to make sure everybody's on a level playing field as their sort of excuse to make it sound nice. But really, what the hell, Sony? Who wants to buy a new upgraded console so you can be held back by the old hardware? Can you imagine anybody on PC? Can you imagine any PC dev saying, hey, we're going to hold everything back for our lowest common denominator owners? That's ridiculous. And Microsoft, you better be paying attention to how dumb this is as well, because if you don't put out a system that allows developers to go full 60 frames per second, take advantage of all the power, not hold it back, not be tied down to the original Xbox, then there's no point in having that system either. So this isn't how you sell a more powerful system. Post your thoughts down below. That does it for me, The Red Dragon. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Are you listening? Damn.